So first of all, congratulations, of course, to QSoft for this 5-year milestone, and it's really my pleasure and an honor to be able to give this lecture in the Science Week, celebrating the accomplishments and also probably making plans for the future. I'm going to give a talk about with a perspective on quantum technologies and quantum computing from the perspective of my own field, which is law and information law. And I will just a quick overview. I will give a little bit of background about myself. There's like in the title, I'm talking about quantum technologies, but in my talk, I want to focus on quantum computing. Start off with, yeah, we're at this place where we're really moving from theory to possibility to reality. You know, like these quantum computing resources are more and more expected to have a big impact on our society, a real impact. I want to then discuss some ethical, legal, and societal issues with respect to these potential emergence of quantum computing, and then discuss governance of quantum computing, governance at different levels. You could discuss governance from many other perspectives, but I'm going to take 4 perspectives: international law and norm development, economic regulation, a little bit of liability, fundamental rights and regulation by design, and then I want to end with Q&A, and I'm really planning to have quite a bit of time left over for discussion. So about my background, as mentioned, I have a background in law and theoretical mathematics. I studied theoretical mathematics first. Actually, I have a first year. I studied at the University of Amsterdam. I was the first year of the beta propeduizer in 1996. And I also studied physics and astronomy. That was actually, I was planning to be an astronomer. That was my first choice. But I was really grabbed by especially by algebra, and totally intrigued by the mathematics that I was learning in that first year, and continued studying mathematics from the second year. But I have a bit of a connection with those fields from my educational background. I did a PhD. I switched to law after I studied law. Then I did a PhD in law. I work then now since a while at the Institute for Information Law at the University of Amsterdam, which is a world-leading research institute at the Faculty of Law. It's the largest research institute at the law school. To study the law with respect to, very generally, the production, distribution, and consumption of information in our society. So my work focuses on the regulation of internet-based services and electronic communications, online platforms, and fundamental rights. And since a few years, I've picked up on the topic of quantum technologies, quantum computing, through the work I'm doing on the legal and societal sounding board of the Quantum Software Consortium. And in this context, I'm working at the Institute for Information Law with Ott van Dalen, who's a PhD candidate, and Joris van Apeldoorn on quantum-related issues. I'm also involved in the development of ethical, legal, societal issues, related actions on these questions within Quantum Delta Netherlands. So on quantum computing, from theory to adoption, or maybe I was thinking from theory to possibility to eventual reality. So I think this is all news that we've all have seen. We got some news last year, of course, about Google's advances. Now recently, advances were made in China. I mean, there are probably many more smaller advances, but this is the kind of news that nowadays totally makes the front pages of international newspapers. And so we really see we're at this place where, you know, breakthroughs are made in a very significant way. I picked up just a little paragraph that is, for me, very informative, you know, from the National Agenda for Quantum Technologies of the Netherlands, where it's explained that quantum technology is a key technology that will enable radical new products and services, and really see promised application, molecular and materials calculations, geolocation without GPS, and we're therefore at the dawn of a technological revolution. And obviously, you know, any such technological revolution will also come with major societal consequences. You know, like it is promised that it will make a major contribution to the resolution of social challenges. But I think it's obvious that technological revolutions also come with potential challenges. So the Netherlands, then finally, of course, is and partly due to the work that is being done in Amsterdam, is in the scientific and technological vanguard of developments, and all around the world, governments and corporations are investing heavily in quantum research and innovation. I mean, this is an investment agenda for the Netherlands, but it's very clear that we're in a place now where these kinds of agendas are becoming a very important reality. So moving to the ethical, legal, societal issues, just quickly, you know, I think the first real kind of clear issue that we see from a legal and policy perspective are the issues around cryptography. So this is just a copy of NIST post-quantum cryptography program that they have started already a while ago, and that is, you know, like progressing over time. There's a competition for algorithms to become new standards for cryptography. And this is in anticipation of the possibility of quantum computers becoming a reality. And even if those quantum computers are not going to arrive anytime soon, or maybe not arrive at all, it's very important work that this is being done. So already the possibility of quantum computers is giving rise to important policy challenges. Then this is another perspective on the possibility of quantum computers and the quantum arms race. So this is, I copied from just a recent report, very recent, from the World Economic Forum, had a report on emerging technologies and cybersecurity. And quantum computing was a big part of that report. I picked it up. It's actually very similar thinking here as I've developed in some work that we've been doing. But it's basically saying quantum technology has this potential to be game-changing for national security. Currently, some national governments are putting significant investment into the development of sovereign quantum technologies and skills. So sovereign, really connecting to, you know, the technology connecting to the national interest. And several countries are placing quantum technologies on their lists of controlled goods, you know, goods that are being controlled by export restrictions. The potential concentration of the first sovereign quantum capabilities, technologies, and experts, so it's also about humans, in a small number of advanced nations has geopolitical implications. As with all new technologies that raise the bar in terms of competitiveness, there is a global risk that competition and protectionism will interfere with international collaboration and equitable access. This could act as a major barrier to unlocking the full potential economic and societal benefits of quantum technology to the wider economy, and widen asymmetries in terms of security and industrial capability. If equitable access to the technologies is not ensured, nations that have sovereign quantum capabilities may use them to create a strategic advantage, while other nations fall into quantum poverty. This is from the World Economic Forum. But I really think it's very interesting, considering the geopolitical and national security implications around quantum computing. We can see a potential closing up for the possibilities of for society more generally, and also the distribution of those of that beneficial potential. So it's really pointing out, you know, like the need to come up with some kind of governance frameworks to ensure a balance between those interests. Then the second perspective is a bit more commercial, a bit more in economic terms. We have pretty heated discussions by now around what is called big tech. We have the techlash since a few years. Europe's European legislative branch is in full swing, trying to figure out how to deal with this rather extreme dominance of certain technology firms. these, not surprisingly, some of these companies, of course, are also very leading in the race to develop quantum computing. So it would be, in a situation where, we are in a situation where quantum computing is being developed in a market that was already showing signs of rather significant forms of concentration. And so that it is to be expected that that quantum computing will strengthen those concerns about the power of these computing companies. But I think if we look at the question of ethical, legal, societal issues, we are really at the place where there's still more questions than answers. And the first reason for that is the first question that is listed here. It's like, what the ethical, legal, and societal issues are with respect to technology, of course, depend very much on what will be the actual usages of these quantum computers, what will actually be their applications. And we see, of course, a start in having discussions around what these possible applications would be in the pharmaceutical field or in the field of finance or logistics. But we're really not at the place yet where we can really start to oversee, the societal consequences of that and understand really well the benefits and harms. So that is really a place where still a lot of work will have to be done. Personally, I'm very interested in questions around access to quantum computing resources. Who will have such access when those quantum computing resources are developed? What usage will and should be allowed when quantum computers are a reality? How will the usage of these resources be accounted for? How can you figure out what has been done with a quantum computer and create some form of accountability? And how will the control over these technologies be distributed from an international as well as an economic point of view? These are, I think, very crucial questions that we have to start to understand. So what knowledge and expertise is needed to answer questions like this? Well, this is a very multidisciplinary type of question, like looking at ethical, legal, societal issues. You need the social sciences, you need legal scholars, but you also need technologists, of course, to understand, the technologies and their applications. What I propose in today's talk is to use a frame, governance, that is a very useful and broad frame to include many of those different types of perspectives. Governance, and this I'm here taking a broad definition from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Technology governance can be defined as the process of exercising political, economic, and administrative authority in the development, diffusion, and operation of technology in societies. It can consist of norms, so there law can come in, regulations, but also standards that can be of more technical nature, and customs. But it can also be operationalized through physical and virtual architectures that manage risks and benefits. Technology governance pertains to formal government activities, but also to the activities of firms, civil society organizations, and communities of practice. In its broadest sense, it represents the sum of the many ways in which individuals and organizations shape technology and how, conversely, technology shapes social order. So I want to, as I mentioned in the beginning, talk about governance at different levels. So 4 levels I want to discuss: international law and norm development, economic regulation, fundamental rights, and regulation by design. On international law and norm development, so I wanted to start with an example of a technology that's, and in quantum technology is actually somewhat related because of the work that is being done on quantum communication. This is the first international telephony treaty. It's actually the Convention on Telegraphy and on the telegraph, and it was concluded in Paris in 1865. And due to the international implications of telecommunications, of the telegraph, and the need for coordination, the so-called ITU was established to create international norms around this new technology and its application. So there's a very good and clear and very early example of international norm setting around new technologies. So this is with respect to quantum. Actually, we have started to see the emergence of some international activity and agreements with respect to quantum technologies. This is the Tokyo Statement of Quantum Cooperation from December last year, that is released by the government of the United States and the government of Japan. So this is about the recognition of the importance of science, technology, and innovation, and the benefits that these technologies could have, and really setting up a framework for sharing knowledge and for contributing to the development of capabilities in these areas. So this is really a first example of international norm setting in this area. So, and maybe not surprisingly, I mean, it will not come as a surprise, the connection between Japan and the US, the agreement probably in the background is also the role of and activities of China, as it's mentioned earlier. This is from the earlier slide as well. The developments in China, where China is investing very heavily also in quantum technology and quantum computing, and there's of course a race to be the first and to create alliances, that will strengthen, the race against China. Europe is of course positioning itself as well, and Europe has by now, in relation to its position in technology markets, they've been called at times the regulator of technology. There's like United States and China are the ones that are really innovating and producing new technologies, and in particular in relation to cloud and internet services, where Europe is the one that is really innovating in terms of regulation. But Europe has, with the new European Commission, has taken a very strong kind of geopolitical stance and made this idea of sovereignty also in the digital realm one of its core objectives. So this is from a press release from September this year, the keys to sovereignty. Pointing to the technological war between the United States and China, the need for Europe to also position itself and to lay the foundations for its sovereignty for the next 20 years. And then, what is part of that for Europe? At the forefront of the major challenges is our digital sovereignty, which, according to the European Commission, rests on three inseparable pillars: computing power, control over our data, and secure connectivity. And it's really in this context that quantum computing has also started popping up, quantum computing and quantum communication as well. So firstly, Europe's capacity to develop and produce the world's most powerful processors, including quantum ones, must be increased without further delay. So it's really at the high political level that the connection is made also between being at the forefront of the development of this technology and the sovereignty of our society and the political systems that we are part of. So I want to make here a connection to some discussions that I've been a part of myself. This is a slide from the famous Snowden revelations. This is the so-called PRISM program. And this slide showed how the United States intelligence community was able to break into, or acquire the data of very widely used internet consumer services, from Gmail to Facebook to Skype and YouTube, and really grab data at a very large scale. And so this of course, it was actually for legal scholars like me. We were working on this before these revelations came. We were very specifically working on this question of what type of data in the cloud is becoming available, to foreign intelligence agencies. and under US law, it's quite clearly spelled out. That is actually a benefit of US law, that it's quite transparent. What is possible. It was quite clear that the standards for acquiring data of non-US persons in cloud services was very low, and so and that, of course, you could see that as a big problem using these types of cloud services when you're using them and not having these kinds of protections that you would maybe like to have for your privacy or your organization's data. So this brings up the question, if, from an economic perspective, and from the perspective of development of cloud computing, it would make a lot of sense to have international agreements, around, like not grabbing each other's data, even if you can, because that makes it possible for internationally operating cloud companies to operate in a global environment and to, be interoperable and to not be worried about where exactly they will be located and the consequences for that for the data of their customers. But the problem here is that in the international relations context, it's never really been done, or it's never really been possible to make agreements around spying on these types of infrastructures. So this is just relatively short, not that long after the Snowden revelations. There was, of course, a lot of discussion around, like, what should governments be able to do, and how should they be able to use the fact that they have large cloud companies operating internationally, use that to get data of customers. Should there be restrictions on this, and should there be international agreements, to deal with the fallout also of the Snowden revelations? And but also President Obama, then President Obama affirmed, no, we do not have any no spy agreements. There are so-called agreements to share intelligence, but these do not apply that we still do not spy. So we may have an agreement, Five Eyes agreement with the United Kingdom, but that doesn't mean that we're still not, we can still do what we want in terms of spying on the international level. So that is, I think, an important reality to take into account when thinking about this area of international norm development. It's what is possible in terms of international norm development. It can be quite restricted. This is one such project that I also had at the time had the opportunity to engage with. This work was towards a multilateral standards for surveillance reform, was work that was directed at having some agreement between, let's say, European and countries and United States on not having at least certain types of restrictions on foreign intelligence surveillance. But in the end, these proposals have not been successful. So it is the point here being, it's going to be really quite hard to get to agreements at this level. But at the same time, it is of course, very necessary, and we will see a lot of international norm development in this area in the coming years, I expect, with respect to quantum computing. On economic regulation. So generally, competition law and antitrust law, these are general laws that prohibit abuse of dominant power and anti-competitive agreements between firms to foreclose particular markets. Then you have a more specific form of economic regulation, which is often called ex-ante regulation. So competition antitrust is ex post. The law is there with general norms, and it kicks in if the abusive behavior takes place. Ex-ante regulation is adopted at the moment that there are certain structures in markets that are so problematic that you have to intervene beforehand. You see that, for instance, in telecommunications market, where there are natural monopolies if you wouldn't intervene. So these are sector-specific regulations to ensure functioning markets. So it's common in communications and other network markets and markets with very high entry costs. Then you have intellectual property, patents, and copyright, which is about the stimulation of research and innovation and other creative production through the granting of artificial, legal, and legally enforced monopolies. So you have an invention, you get a patent, and you get a monopoly on exploiting that patent for a certain period of time, all like to benefit in the end research, science, and innovation. So if you look at that in relation to quantum computing, then competition law, antitrust law will be, these are general laws, will be applicable to the behavior of potential dominant producer of quantum computing technology. And so if there is one firm, that has these quantum computing resources, they can try to exploit the fact that they're a monopoly, but we have antitrust law to apply to their behavior and the way that they deal with granting access to these resources. So that is to some comfort. It may be so that ex ante regulation may be needed or not, but that will be dependent on the development of the relevant markets and the integration of quantum computing in existing cloud computing offerings. So ex ante regulation that is currently on the table include requirements on interoperability, for instance. You can think in many directions there. We are currently in a place where, with respect to cloud computing, like basic classical cloud computing, we see more and more discussions of the discussions around the necessity of certain forms of regulatory requirements. Then intellectual property, patents, and copyright will apply to relevant technological breakthroughs, including in particular applications and including aspects of certain algorithms potentially. So on quantum computing and liability, this is related to the economic regulation point. The question, who will be responsible for harmful usage of eventual quantum computing resources? So, and that you can compare to the question which is currently very much discussed, who should be responsible for the illegal use of online platforms and cloud computing resources more generally. There you have different options. You can make those offering quantum computing resources liable and responsible. Strict liability, anything that happens that has been done illegally, you hold the one that offered the resources responsible. You could make just the ones using the quantum computing resources responsible, but there you of course then have the question of how are you going to track all of that, or a combination of those two. So at the moment in Europe, we are really at the juncture of a new kind of going into a new era with respect to these types of questions. So this is Thierry Breton. He's one of the members of the European Commission, originally from France, and he says just this weekend, he's working in the weekend. It's time to put digital services at the service of Europeans. 15th December, it's actually, they have been now delaying two times. It was supposed to happen actually today, and I was somewhat looking forward to mention that. But when I looked, they have delayed it. But they will come with two major legal acts which go hand in hand: the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. And here's together with Margaret Verstager in a press conference. And basically, this Digital Services Act is establishing a framework for digital services within a digital single market in Europe and establishing these liability rules. The Digital Markets Act is really about dealing with some of these new forms of dominance of platforms and ensuring some possibility of fair competition in digital markets. So there's a lot of developments there, and quantum computing would end up in, kind of having to fit into those kind of existing regulatory structures. On fundamental rights, and this is important for me and also at the Institute, we take fundamental rights as a very important normative starting point. And we know from classical computing and electronic communications, more generally, they have had a real profound impact on fundamental rights, on the exercise of fundamental rights. The right to private life, the right to the protection of personal data, the right to protection of personal data. This right and the law with respect to the protection of personal data has really emerged in response to the emergence of classical computing in public administration and in the business environment. And then finally, also the right to freedom of expression, more generally communication freedom, and the right to confidentiality of private communication, which is, of course, can link that to the issues around encryption. So quantum computing has this very strong, real implications already in the area of information security. It has the potential to break widely used encryption standards impacting information security in our societies. So you can look at this information security perspective from a national security perspective, and that is definitely happening. You can look at it from an economic security and welfare perspective. It could, if you break information security, it can have big economic consequences. But you can, of course, also, and we should also look at that from the perspective of human rights. So, and what are then the appropriate legal measures and policies that can be adopted to ensure that quantum computers and communications will benefit and not harm fundamental rights? So here I just want to flag the work that is being done by Os van Dalen. He's in the course of working on a PhD project on the human rights compatibility of the regulation of offensive and defensive information security technologies, and quantum computing development being a part of that. Then finally, I want to end with some words on the governance through regulation by design. So this is a picture I always use in my lectures with my information law master students on regulation by design. Regulation by design in the field of information law in the legal field is particularly well developed as a field or a perspective in relation to privacy by design. But you can think of other forms of regulation by design. And this picture, I use it to help students understand what this is designed for. What kind of values, values have been went into the design of this particular bench that is somewhere in a metro station in Rotterdam. So what I will not do it interactively now, but what typically students will come up with is that, well, this is designed so that you can sleep on it. This is designed so that homeless people cannot lay down. This is designed maybe for a certain amount of privacy, where you have the possibility to sit on the bench, and it's you have your space, and it's not that if someone comes sit next to you, they come closer and closer to you. Like there's these little things in between that prevent that from happening. And I think it's also what you hear and what I sometimes suggest myself. This is made for certain hygiene or cleanliness. It's very easy to clean. If you drop your coffee, it falls right through. So and these are all things that they're not a surprise. It's not a coincidence. These people that make objects like this, design objects like this, they're very deliberate in what they create and what properties these objects should have in the real world. So. In the 1990s, in the information law or cyber law domain, there was a lot of discussion about the way in which code start to have these types of regulatory properties. So this is from Larry Lessig's a famous book, the popularizing book in the cyber law field, Code is Law. He said, what are these forms of regulation? What are these sources of regulation? Law is a source of regulation. The market is a source of regulation. We leave things also to, the market. We say we leave that to the market, which means we leave it to, the demand and supply and demand forces to organize certain dynamics. We have, of course, social norms. Social norms are the predominant form of organization and regulation in our society. And architecture and increasingly also computer code has these regulatory properties. So this is quite widely recognized now, and this is a statement from this is a claim from Roger Brownsworth, talking about techno-regulation, technological management. And it's really this realization that a lot of regulation is actually happening through, the way in which technologies are being created and the properties that they're given. So this, I think, is a very productive starting point also for, collaboration between quantum technologists and lawyers and governance scholars. So most quantum computing research has been directed at the challenge of building actually functional quantum computing hardware, parts of hardware, and for algorithms to make them mathematically efficient. What is the evaluation criteria? Or is really, can it exist? Can it do certain things? And would it have, like, what is the theoretical possibility of doing so? In a world where quantum computers become a reality, a range of other technical properties will of course have to be looked at to ensure proper interactions of these technologies in the world around us. So this is the core focus of my work with Joris van Hoboken, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Information Law at CW. So questions that we would like to look at, or that we are looking at. So it's like quantum computing poses challenges to the fulfillment of, security properties, like in security thinking around computers. Security stands basically for, is the machine doing what you want it to do, and is it available to the people that you want it to be available to? So security has this very kind of broad connotation. And security properties like confidentiality, verifiability, and accountability are quite challenged, seem quite challenged in a quantum computing environment. So the impact the field has on confidentiality is already recognized and has strongly shaped research in the field of cryptography by now. So due to the kind of physical nature of quantum computing and the destructive nature of measurements, it can be hard to verify that the quantum device is doing what it's supposed to do. So how would you be able to verify, that the machine is doing what you would like it to do, or what you promised it to do? This, together with the random nature of calculations, makes it also hard to take responsibility for the functioning and outcomes of quantum algorithms, accountability. So these seem to us very crucial challenges that would be very interesting to take up from the perspective of legal and governance perspectives, but also the perspective of technologists working on these, potentially working on these technologies, and looking at what are the possibilities to ensure similar properties. How close can you get to ensuring some of these properties in the context of quantum computing? So I have actually by now finished my slides right exactly at the moment that I was planning to really that I wanted to be finished for sure. So thank you very much for your attention and being part of this Science Week. And I look forward to any questions or